Picture your name on the trail map, the whole mountain empty, and yours before the lifts open. A fire going in the lodge while the snow guns run in the dark outside. This is not a daydream you have to be a billionaire to price out. In October 2024, a New Hampshire hill called Black Mountain changed hands for about $7.5 million, bought by a local. Killington and Pico, in Vermont, recently went to an individual investor too, not a megacorporation. Around 487 ski areas were operating in the United States in the 2023-24 season, and together they drew 60.4 million skier visits, down from a record 65.4 million the year before. The average one grossed about $46 million over roughly 106 operating days. So the door really is open. You could buy a mountain. The trouble is that the mountain is the least reliable thing you will own. A ski resort is not really a mountain you play on. It is a high fixed-cost cash machine, weather exposed, whose profit for the year is mostly settled months before the first snowflake falls. And in the West, the mountain itself frequently belongs to the federal government. What you own is a snowmaking and lift factory sitting on rented public land. About 122 U.S. ski areas operate on national forest land, roughly 60% of the country's downhill capacity, under long-term special use permits. The rent is a graduated slice of your revenue, written into federal statute, 1.5% of adjusted gross revenue at the bottom, climbing to a full 4% once you clear $50 million. The taxpayer, in effect, is your revenue share landlord. And the oldest belief in the industry turns out to be backward. The money is in the skiing itself. That sounds wrong, and getting it wrong is exactly what bankrupted nearly everyone who did. What it costs to get through the door is the smallest number in the whole deal, a down payment on a capital bill that never stops arriving. The market splits in two, with almost nothing in between. Under $5 million buys a small lift-served hill that is usually losing money and needs everything replaced. A real regional resort runs from $25 million into the low hundreds. Arapahoe Basin in Colorado sold for $105 million in a deal that closed in November 2024. And whatever you bid, you are bidding against balance sheets you cannot match. Vail Resorts sat on roughly $1.02 billion of acquisition capital going into the 2024-25 season, which is why independents in this business tend to get bought rather than built. The listing almost never includes modern lifts or snowmaking, and both cost a fortune. A basic fixed-grip chairlift might run a few $100,000 to a couple of million. A modern detachable six-seater runs into the millions. Stratton in Vermont paid about $7.1 million for one around 2018, and Killington's new Superstar Express is set to cost $12.16 million for the 2025-26 season. A gondola can be $10 to $30 million or more. A full snowmaking system, by trade estimates, runs anywhere from $500,000 to $5 million and up, and snowmaking is no longer optional. One modern chairlift, in other words, can cost more than an entire small resort sells for. Then there is the machinery that runs every day whether anyone skis or not. Labor is almost always the biggest line. At Vail's scale, wages ran about $731 million in fiscal 2024, roughly 42% of what it costs to run the mountains, and you cannot flex it much. A resort still needs something like 80 to 90% of its staff on a dead, empty Tuesday, because the lifts, the patrol, and the groomers all have to be there regardless of the crowd. On top of payroll sits energy, where trade estimates run from a few $100,000 into the millions, and snowmaking alone can eat half of it. Grooming adds a fleet of snowcats at a few $100,000 each, fueled and crewed all night. Then lift maintenance, insurance, marketing, and the Forest Service rent skimming up to 4 cents off every additional dollar. None of that touches the capital treadmill underneath. Across the industry, ski areas spent $754.3 million on capital improvements in a single season, $293 million of it on lifts alone, about $29.20 reinvested for every skier who showed up. That base gets paid whether 5,000 people come through the gates or 500. That mismatch is the danger at the center of the business. Most of those costs are locked in the moment the resort opens. The payroll that cannot drop below 80 or 90%, the patrol, the grooming, the insurance, the debt, while the revenue has to be earned inside a season that averages only about 106 operating days, and by trade estimates, the bulk of it lands in a window of roughly 4 months, whose length depends on snow no owner can order. That is operating leverage, and it cuts both ways. A warm year cannot shed a fixed base to match the missing revenue, so the same costs that print money in a good winter turn straight into a loss in a bad one, and the revenue side carries a risk you cannot insure against. Peer-reviewed research finds that U.S. ski seasons from 2000 to 2019 were already 5.5 to 7.1 days shorter than they had been from 1960 to 1979, even counting snowmaking, with a projected 14 to 33 fewer days by the 2050s under milder scenarios and more under harsher ones. Snowmaking is the hedge, and it is a rising cost of its own, close to useless where water and power run short. Underneath the weather sits leverage. Even Vail, the most disciplined operator in the field, carries net debt of around 2.5 to 3 times its annual EBITDA. An independent who bought with a small down payment and a large mortgage against weather-dependent cash flow is running far hotter. There are quieter ways to end, too. Some owners sell the mountain and lease it back to raise cash, and the rent from that trade comes due first, in summer, whether or not it snowed the winter before. Peak Resorts did exactly this with a single landlord, EPR Properties, on 20-year triple-net leases, where the tenant covers the taxes, insurance, and upkeep, and its interest ran near 12% of revenue. One uninsured event can do it in a single stroke. Whitecap Mountains in Wisconsin filed for Chapter 11 in November 2025 after a fire and a warm winter left it uninsured for a roughly $5 million rebuild. Behind all of it is the slow squeeze that already ran the count of U.S. ski areas from about 1,000 in the late 1960s down to the 486 standing today. So how does anyone make this pay? By selling the winter in the summer. Before 2008, a ski resort was a weather lottery. You set a day ticket price, opened the gates, and hoped for snow on the weekends. Then Vail launched the Epic Pass in 2008 at $579 for a season across 5 mountains, sold mostly before a single flake had fallen. That one product turned a gambling business into a subscription, and it rewired the entire industry. Pass products now bring in roughly 2/3 of Vail's lift revenue and drive about 3/4 of its skier visits, up from around 1/4 of lift revenue back in 2008. In that first year, the company sold about 59,100 passes. For the 2024-25 season, it sold roughly 2.3 million pass units, pre-committing more than $975 million in revenue before the lifts even spun. What makes that cash valuable is when it arrives. Vail collects most of it from March through the fall. For skiing, it will not deliver until December through April. Sitting on its balance sheet at the end of January 2024 was $660.3 million of deferred revenue, money already in the bank for a product not yet handed over. It is an interest-free float, funded by the customers themselves, the same negative working capital trick that makes Costco memberships and insurance premiums so valuable. The operator is funded months before it has to do the work. Everything else in the model exists to protect that float. The $299 walk-up window ticket that appeared at Vail Mountain in January 2024 is a price almost no one actually pays. The blended figure the company collected per visit that year was $82.14. The steep sticker works as an anchor, there to make the pass look like the only sane way in and herd you into pre-committing. The spring deadline, priced as the lowest of the year, pulls your cash forward. Cheaper tiered day passes, bought in advance, scoop up the skier who will only come once or twice. And once you are on the mountain, the economy is captive, because you cannot carry your own lunch up the gondola. Ski school revenue at Vail actually grew 6% in fiscal 2024, the same year visits fell, with a full-day private lesson at a resort like Deer Valley reaching up to $1,470. Even the parking is a line item now. Several of Vail's Tahoe resorts charge $20 to $35 a day for a space that used to be free, and the town of Vail, the municipality, charges up to $50, and took in about $1.7 million in its first summer of paid parking. Put it together, and the machine does something that used to be impossible. In that same fiscal 2024, a poor snow year, Vail's skier visits fell 9.5%. Its resort-reported EBITDA fell only 1.2%. Almost the whole bad winter was absorbed because the money had been collected before anyone knew the winter would be bad. Pass revenue rose 9.4% in the very same year that walk-up window revenue fell 10.7%. The business had quietly rebuilt itself around cash paid in advance. It also inverts the oldest piece of folklore in the trade, the line that resorts lose money on skiing and make it on real estate. That was true once. When Vail was founded in 1962, early investors reportedly received a lifetime ski pass for buying a condo priced around $10,000. The lift was the hook, and the land was the profit. But that flywheel has largely stopped turning. In fiscal 2024, Vail's lodging arm earned just $23 million of EBITDA on around $341 million in revenue, a margin near 7%, while the mountain operation itself ran near 31%. Today, the mountain carries the company, and the hotels barely clear break-even. The one rival that could contest all of this is the one you cannot audit. Alterra, which runs the competing Icon Pass, is privately held and does not disclose its numbers, though a 2024 transaction reportedly valued it above $3 billion. It launched Icon in 2018 as the direct answer to Epic, and the two-pass arms race locked the subscription model in as the way the whole industry now works. You can watch both outcomes in two people who ran the same math to opposite ends. Rob Katz, who launched the Epic Pass in 2008, spent the years after it engineering the weather out of the model, one selling season at a time. Pass products went from roughly a quarter of lift revenue to about 2/3, and Vail today runs 34 U.S. resorts at a resort EBITDA margin near 29%. Les Oden ran the opposite play. Through the 1990s, he built American Skiing Company by borrowing hundreds of millions in high-yield bonds to buy resorts and cover them in new condos, lifts, and snowmaking, betting the debt on winter showing up. Several mild seasons showed up instead. In fiscal 2001, the company posted about a $70 million operating loss, while owing more than $52 million a year in interest on roughly $400 million in debt. Oden stepped down that March, and the company was sold off in pieces and dissolved by 2007. IntraWest, the other great empire of that era, broke the same way one crisis later, a $2.8 billion leveraged buyout in 2006 that nearly went under when the loan came due across 2008 and 2009. Every operator who collapsed in this business had leveraged a real estate first thesis into a warm winter. Everyone that survived had learned to sell the season in advance. So price a warm winter two ways, starting with the company that engineered its way out of one. In fiscal 2024, the year ending that July, Vail took a genuinely poor snow season. Skier visits fell 9.5% to 17.56 million. In the old day ticket world, that is a catastrophe. Instead, resort-reported EBITDA slipped just 1.2% to $825.1 million, on revenue that barely moved at $2.885 billion. Net income did fall 15% to $230.4 million, because depreciation, interest, and the capital treadmill do not care about snow either. But the top line held because the cash was already banked. Visits down 9.5%, EBITDA down barely 1%. That is what prepayment buys. Now run it for the resort you could actually afford, with none of that armor. What follows is an illustrative model, not any real resort's audited books, built on the industry's cost ranges. Call it 300,000 visits in a normal year at a blended $95 each once you add lessons, food, and rentals, about $28.5 million in revenue. Your operating costs, almost all of them fixed, run near $21 million, so a good year clears roughly $7.5 million in operating profit, about a 26% margin. You would buy that. Then one warm winter arrives. Visits drop 30% to 210,000, and to move tickets at all, you discount, so the blended price sags toward $80, and revenue falls about 40% to near $17 million. Your costs barely give. You are still grooming every night the guns can run, still paying patrol and insurance and the lease and the debt service, so costs come down maybe 8 to 10% to around $19 million. Do the subtraction. 17 million in, 19 million out. A $7.5 million profit has become a $2 million loss. A 30% drop in visitors erased the profit outright and kept cutting well past it. Vail lost 9.5% of its visitors and hardly noticed, because it had already been paid. You would lose 30% of yours and go under, because you had not. So the pass did not beat winter. It moved the bet. It buys the operator out of one bad season, the way it bought Vail out of 2024. What it cannot buy anyone out of is a run of bad seasons, or a slow, measured loss of winter itself. As of early 2026, even Vail is pressing against that ceiling. Its own chief executive called the 2025-26 season worse than 2012. For the Rockies, new pass holder growth turned negative for the first time, and the stock is down roughly 54% over 5 years. A pending class action even alleges the two big passes have pushed prices too far, a case still unresolved. The pass protects the strongest operator in the world from one warm winter, and no operator from the trend running underneath it. Which brings you back to the trail map with your name on it, and the fire in the empty lodge. Now you can see what you would actually be signing for. Not a mountain. A promise you sell in July to deliver snow in January. And the one line item the mountain can never quote you is whether that winter is going to show up.